Welcome back, everybody. Just before we get going on this most fundamental of all panels, really, in international geopolitics, just a couple of quick housekeeping points. First of all, I always want to thank everybody on behalf of Halifax International Security Forum, of which I'm Vice President, for being so disciplined in wearing masks and keeping distancing and using hand sanitizer and so on. It's not only important for our own safety, this is live streamed. There are journalists around. It's very important that we also show a leadership role, each and every one of us. So thank you very much for that. Another housekeeping point, which moves us closer to the topic of discussion, which is titled, as you can see, #StandTogether on China. As Peter said yesterday, we're launching a social media campaign that has the same title of the panel, Stand Together on China. And it's partly based around the HFX China principles, which you can see at the back of this book, which, by the way, I don't know who wrote it, but a masterpiece, a tour de force, and I think you have no excuse but not to read it. But this is just a really easy and quick way to show some solidarity with people such as the Uyghurs, the people of Hong Kong, and it's 10 to 15 seconds of your time, and you'll find booths around the building. So please do take up that opportunity if you so choose. It's my great pleasure to welcome 4 distinguished panelists, at least 2 of whom have travelled quite a long way, and the other 2 have travelled sort of less far, but still we're really grateful to have you here. To my right is Malcolm Turnbull, the former Prime Minister of Australia. It's a great pleasure to have you here, and welcome to Halifax. To his right is Goran Grlić Radman, the Foreign and Europe Minister of Croatia. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to welcome back also Ram Madhov, the former National General Secretary of the BJP in India, and also one of India's most prominent public intellectuals. And next to Ram Madhov is Helen Conway-Mouret, who's the Secretary of the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Armed Forces Committee of the French Senate. Welcome also. Thank you all for being here. I think that when we get into this discussion, which of course is about alliances, that's why we're calling it Stand Together on China, or #Stand Together on China, there can be a danger in starting at point 2 in the discussion. And we'll certainly come to specifics about how we can cooperate better with a French lady and an Australian gentleman and a British moderator. We will, of course, come to a little hiccup that happened earlier in the year called AUKUS, and I'll invite comments from anybody in the audience on that as well. But it seems to me there's a question that comes prior to all of that. And that is that assuming we were to get together and we avoid all the bumps in the road, and given that China is not going to share our values anytime soon, we're past the early assumptions of the post-Cold War era, which was that China's version of capitalism would ineluctably lead to democracy. Well, what would a stable if imperfect equilibrium, actually look like? What do we actually want in the real world to achieve if we even get all these alliances together? Or is there no stable equilibrium? Is antagonism baked into this relationship for the foreseeable future, and we simply have to manage it and deal with it? Mr. Turnbull.
Thanks, Robin, and thank you to the Halifax Forum and for making this event possible and inviting us, Lucy and I, here for today. Look, what do we want to achieve? We want an Indo-Pacific where the strong cannot do as they will and the weak do not suffer as they must. That's what the Athenian ambassadors said to the Melians 2,500 years ago. The strong, might is right. That was their message. Realpolitik. That's what we seek to resist. We want an Indo-Pacific where every nation, big or small, is able to pursue its destiny, its ambitions, respecting the rights of others. Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, summed it up very well in the 1960s when he quoted an old proverb which said, "The big fish eat the little fish and the little fish eat the shrimps." Well, I guess Australia would be a little fish rather than a shrimp, or a medium-sized fish, but we don't want to get eaten by any big fish, right? Doesn't matter who they are. And so that rule of law that the Admiral spoke about earlier is what we are fighting for in the Indo-Pacific. That's it. No corruption, no coercion, no covert subversion of our democratic values or our institutions. That's what it's all about, and that's why we have to come together. That's why we need to see the Indo-Pacific not as a series of nations linked to the hubs in either Beijing or Washington like spokes to a wheel, but rather like a mesh working together. That's why I kept the Trans-Pacific Partnership alive after Donald Trump pulled out. Actually left the United States a free option to return at some point in the future. That's why we worked so closely on our ties with Indonesia. It's why, frankly, I have reservations about the submarine aspect of the AUKUS deal, because I like the idea of France, a Pacific power, being brought in closer to work with us together in freedom's cause. We need more friends, more allies. We need to not see the world in a bipolar way, because what we need to see the world as one where the democracies, the like-minded countries that share our values of freedom, are working together. And as the Admiral Aquiliano said earlier, we want to get more people to play. It's not a game, regrettably. It's very serious. He knows that better than anyone. But we need to have more allies, more partners, more like-minded nations working together. And that's why this forum is so important.
Thank you. We'll certainly come back to the specifics you mentioned about AUKUS in a few moments. Mr. Galić-Radman, from the Croatian perspective, from the perspective of Southeast Europe and Europe generally, and I'll be asking a similar question to Senator Conway-Mouret, do you have the sense that in the last year, I mean, since this handbook was written, I think most of it stands, and yet there have been changes. There's a new American president. The European Union seems to have come together more on China. NATO has come together more on China. Do you have the impression that the pushback that has begun is having an effect? Do you feel more secure vis-a-vis China, or are these simply incremental changes and we need to do a lot more?
First of all, thank you very much, and I would like to start by thanking Halifax International Security Forum for inviting me and to bring us together. And had it not been this pandemic, Corona, we would have been also last year as well. However, this pandemic crisis forced us to adapt to a new reality of cooperation, of communication, and of course, setting standards for those who come after us. Yes, I will start also with a sentence I like very much, that we were born to live alone, and to live together is something to be learned. I am representing, yes, my country, small country, Croatia. We are very proud that we are our freedom, our sovereignty, independency, and achieved during Homeland War, and actually our country is sovereignty was forged in the war. But I am also representing European Union, however, and we share common values. We are adopted to the values, like Prime Minister said, of course, rule of law, just not to sustain, to make this world order possible. Also, our slogan during the EU presidency last year, are challenging, so there Europe with a lot of challenges, and no one could expect it that so challenge would be on COVID-19. But however, this crisis united us. Of course, when it comes to China, of course there's no doubt that we share common values. Transatlantic link is indispensable, very, very, very strong, and we are on the same side and on the same track. However, from our perspective on Croatia or Central, Southeast Europe, we see that the problems of the influence of the third countries, not only Russia or China, there are also others, should also to make alert also for us to be more active and to be more present in Southeast Europe. There are some countries, so-called West Balkans countries, composition of the rest of the former Yugoslavia plus Albania. They are on the way to achieve the European perspective. But right now, divisions are deepening, and from our point of view, territory or integrity, it's something that must be preserved. And
do you feel that it's under threat? I mean, there's some, in the non-EU, non-NATO parts of what some people call the Balkans and others don't like and call Southeastern Europe. Yeah. It's more like a competitive space. I mean, let's be clear, the Chinese have been pushing hard into Serbia, haven't they?
Yes, but not only, of course, and it's a question for us. We should just know if we are not there, so someone is coming to fill the vacuum instead of us. We have to more to pay attention to this region, and because this region is surrounded by the members of the European Union and members of the NATO. Mm-hmm. And China or this region, and China is always on the agenda of the Foreign Affairs Council, of course, and the European Union categorized relations with China in three pillars: cooperation, however, the competition, and systemic rivalry. Of course, cooperation, it's on a double track, that so we have and we imposed sanctions like also Russia or Belarus, however, but we have to have also the open channel towards them, mm-hmm. and to see that probably China is rival, but not enemy, and we need China in some the international actually dimension of how to achieve the sustainable world order. But of course, first of all, it's our condition, rules-based international order.
Right. Staying in Europe, and then we'll come out to the very important perspective from India. Senator Conway Murray, as Foreign Minister Gilish Radman referred to, the European Union's referred to as China as a systemic rival. To what extent is that internalized in French political culture, across the board, never mind your own party, the Socialist Party, but other parties, and Mr. Macron and so on? Is it taken seriously, or is it simply thought of, well, this is just another issue in international relations and we deal with it on a case-by-case basis? Is there a sense in the French political classes that no, that there is a full-on challenge here and it needs to be met?
Yes, indeed. First of all, I'd like to say that it's great to see two members of Europe, on this panel, because China, like Russia, I think is everybody's business today. And just a reminder for the Admiral's very powerful speech that indeed we are present in the Indo-Pacific. We intend to continue being present. President Macron has actually announced that France will be building another aircraft carrier. And geography is a lot in geopolitics. So obviously we're concerned with what's happening up north from us in the Mediterranean and so on. But the second ship will be busy and going a little bit further for us. So our presence is there. But China has invited itself in Europe about 10 years ago, about 15 years ago. For us, it was a great new market, great opportunity. And we felt, indeed, with the opening of a gigantic market with 1.5 billion people, that we will be able to, be present, obviously, over there. And equally, we were welcoming a lot of investments. China chose to invest mostly in Europe, with 15% of its investments abroad going to Europe, 12% to ASEAN, and 10% to the United States. So we were the primary target for them. But we then slowly woke up to the fact that China was choosing where it was investing, and it was in infrastructures, 14 ports, airports, and moving slowly to high tech, taking over companies in Germany, a big one, and slowly in France. So there's been a kind of a slow awakening as to the fact that what was called the Silk Roads or Pearl, whatever, I mean, lovely, feminine vocabulary for, in fact, a non-aggressive move by China. No European country was forced to accept the investments. But while we welcomed them initially, I think now we realize that there is this dependency, and we saw it with the pandemic, having even to buy masks from China, that we did not want to be dependent on a country that has been producing army equipment at the scale that we see now, the intimidation daily in the Indo-Pacific, because we are physically present. We have territories there. We have citizens to protect and fairly large maritime areas as well. And we fear, and that's the report that we get from our Navy, that one day there may be just a sad accident simply because the intimidation is getting more and more aggressive. So we have had this coming to us in a non-aggressive way, and now seeing that this country intends indeed to be imposing itself as a leader. And what I retain from the annual speech is that it intends to become a normative country. And with what we observe in Hong Kong, I'm not sure that we all want to have Chinese norms applied to the social, economic, or environmental sectors today.
There's a reference to and it seems like collectively speaking, we've been getting buyer's remorse ever more acutely, especially over the whole of the COVID period. I wanted to turn to you now, Ram Madoff. You're part of the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific region, and to return to the initial question, which was the point about what would a stable equilibrium, a satisfactory and stable equilibrium look like from the Indian perspective? I mean, you share a land border where there were violent clashes not so very long ago, so it's as acute for India as it is for anybody, really. But what, not necessarily in an ideal world, but in a better world than simply accepting Chinese transgressions, but not one where we go into conflict, as happened on your border, what does that stable equilibrium actually look like?
Thank you. China has been rising as an economic power for the last 4 decades. And at least in the first 3 decades, its rise was largely due to the support it got from the United States of America. We never felt, or probably this part of the world never felt, that it would be a threat sooner than later. Why today we feel that very rise, which was propelled by the very countries, is today seen as a challenge? The fact is, 2 aspects to it that we need to understand carefully. Number one, the global power axis today has shifted away from Pacific Atlantic to Indo-Pacific. It is in that region where we are there, the Australians are there, the Japanese are there, and others are there, the ASEAN group of nations are there. It is there that the power axis of the world resides today. It is there that the economies of scale are there. It is there that the trade happens. It is there that the weapons are sold. It is there that the submarines roam around. So the region has acquired great importance. Number 2, in that region today, China is challenging the world order that was built post the Second World War. It is not only challenging it, it is wanting to rewrite the rules of the new world order. It is that exercise that we all want to stop by working together. While doing that, one most important thing that probably we all must keep in mind was that countries in the region like we, India, have had a lot of understanding of that challenge. lack of understanding of that country. Please remember, when you are talking about China, we are not dealing with a nation state. We are dealing with a civilization state. We are dealing with a party state. Unless you understand the civilizational traits of that thinking, unless you understand the 100-year-old party, what is the thinking of it, you can't challenge it through conventional means. That is where I urge that we need to bring in the experience of countries like India, countries in that region. For example, we always insisted that for stopping China from its larger objective, after all, its larger objective is to remain a middle kingdom. It's a civilizational thinking. They cannot be on par with other countries. To stall it, you need to have countries in the region with you. I was listening to the speech of our Indo-PACOM commander just now. If we assume that the mobilization of security forces of the Western powers or naval forces of the Western powers is the way to deal with China, you will have all your ships and submarines in Indian Ocean, but China will be all over in the continental Eurasia. What are we doing about it? Today, just as Indo-Pacific has emerged as a major area of conflict for us in our region, continental Eurasia is also a challenge, especially after the experience of Ukraine in 2014, after the experience of Afghanistan. Today we do not know whether the Western Europe and America still have their focus on that region. So it requires a totally different approach. You need to get the experience of countries in the region, and it needs to be an inclusive approach when it comes to tackling China. When I say inclusive, I say we need to have on board countries in the region. Like, you need to have ASEAN with you. You need to have India fully with you. You need to have India's neighbors with you. You need to have Sri Lanka with you, Bangladesh with you. So we need to approach from that perspective, then probably we will be able to contain China, or at least stop it from that, the whole plan of rewriting a new world order, rebuilding a new world order, which we do not want. It will be authoritarian. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's pick up where Mr. Madoff left off, which is this question of inclusivity and alliance building. And let's go straight into the situation that arose earlier in this year over the submarine deal. Now, you've gone on record as saying that Mr. Morrison was, how shall I put it, less than forthcoming to the French, and I'm putting it gently. Clearly, I think any country, I mean, France, Britain, the United States would be very upset if they'd lost a business deal, a submarine deal with tens of billions of dollars at stake, thousands and thousands of jobs. That's one side, the politics is another side. But in terms of building alliances, there are going to be bumps on the road, aren't there? Because the commercial interest and strategic perceptions do differ always from country to country. But do you believe that the AUKUS deal actually has damaged the potential for broader alliance building, or do you think that, in fact, from the perspective of Beijing, they're probably more worried about the fact that the Brits, the Americans, and the Australians are building these nuclear submarines?
No, I honestly think the submarine aspect of AUKUS has been an own goal for Australia and for the United States. Now, the way in which France was treated was clearly shameful. I mean, President Biden has acknowledged that. So, I don't want to restate what I've said and others have said. France, Australia and the United States, you've got to remember the French submarines were a French-designed boat, but with an American Lockheed Martin combat system. So you could say it was a French design with American brains. Whether that's a good combination, others could judge, but that's the fact. So it was an Australian-French-American partnership, and close friends and allies should have had honest, candid, cards on the table discussions. That didn't happen, and France has been very, I think, upset legitimately. Let's put that to one side. In my view, incorporating that security partnership between France and Australia was enormously valuable. as Senator Conway-Murray has observed, France is an Indo-Pacific power, has 2 million citizens between the Indian and Pacific Oceans and a gigantic maritime domain in the Pacific. President Macron made the submarine partnership really the centrepiece of France's Indo-Pacific strategy, which is absolutely consonant with the values we've been talking about, and indeed then used France's influence to make sure the European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy was on board. So my very strong view is that we should have maintained the arrangements with France. I think our friends and allies in Washington should have encouraged that and made a progression to nuclear naval propulsion with France. There are a lot of sort of naval reasons for that, and there are plenty of admirals here who understand this better than me, but I just highlight this point. French naval nuclear propulsion uses low enriched uranium, enriched to 6%. The United States and Britain, the Brits basically use American technology and American uranium. It's enriched to around 95%. It's weapons grade uranium. We cannot kid ourselves that there isn't a big proliferation issue here. Already Iran is saying, they've said it at the UN, they've said, look, the Iranians are saying, why shouldn't we be able to enrich uranium to 20%? The Americans are going to give the Australians uranium-fueled reactors enriched to 95%. I mean, anyway, there are other issues about sovereignty as well. We are not a nuclear weapons state. We don't even have a civilian nuclear industry. My feeling is that we have compromised relations with a very important ally, America's oldest, France. I think we have compromised our security because the new submarines will not be available for at least 8, probably 10 years longer than they otherwise would have been. So capabilities are delayed, and I think sovereignty is compromised. So, you know, obviously, cooperation between Australia, US and the UK, I mean, we are so close. You know, Australia, as everyone here knows, Australia, US, UK, Canada, New Zealand, Five Eyes, we are allies, we are intimately close, particularly in areas of signals intelligence. So if we can be closer, that's good, but it's kind of, I think it's, leaving the subs aside, it's sort of taking it from, you know, I don't know, 9.5 out of 10 to 9.6 out of 10. So, you know, I just feel we've lost a lot with the submarine experience, and I think the lesson is exactly what Admiral Aquilano was saying earlier. You need more friends. And my friend Dave Petraeus always likes to say, the only thing worse than fighting a war with allies is fighting a war without them. And we need more mates. And you know, as far as China's concerned, I just make this observation: you cannot take a backward step. I mean, we were the first country. My government was the first government to formally ban 5G, right? And as some of the senators here know, I was making that case in Washington long beforehand. The bottom line is we have to recognise China has different values to us. We don't have to pick a fight with them on everything, but where there is vulnerabilities, potentially for us, we've got to hedge our risks. So with 5G, what we were saying, we weren't saying there's a smoking gun. We said, no, there's a loaded gun. And we don't want someone with very different values than ours to have the ability to pull the trigger.
We'll move fairly swiftly on from AUKUS, and anybody who wants to bring it up in the questions is very welcome to, particularly if they're British or American, since they're the other parties to this discussion. But just to finish the point, Senator Conway-Murray, do you feel that this has done lasting damage to alliance building involving France over China? Or is this, of course, a painful episode, but something that, because of the bigger picture, I mean, France is under threat from China as well, that the French government will be able to get over relatively quickly?
I think our own foreign minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, was very vocal as to how we felt about it. So I think there's no point in coming back on the bad manner in which this contract was terminated. I think that's in the past now, and look forward indeed that we are allies, but we also need to be friends and therefore have trust in who we deal with. But I think the biggest what hurt us most was the fact that we felt that we were not needed, when in fact we are present there, as the Prime Minister rightly said. We need to be all together to face to this almighty, powerful country, which China has become very rapidly, not in financial terms, but in military terms as well. And it is building a fleet, for the sea. It is building in all the three armies, and also going into space, maybe before everybody else, and bringing us into this kind of new escalation. So that was the first point. The second point is that by moving to nuclear-propelled submarine there, we felt that somehow it was giving China the excuse, and it doesn't need it, to prove that it will need to replicate and be ready and somehow justify this arms race that it has entered willingly. So we felt that was kind of a very serious matter, and really China didn't need that excuse to build and speed up its armament.
I think it's uncontroversial to say that regardless of whether one was for or against the deal, it's certainly a bump in the road. I mean, if you're looking for greater cooperation internationally amongst democracies on China, then nobody would have wished for this kind of conflict. That's looking backwards. Let's look forward to another issue, which is, I think, can be used as a proxy for how we may or may not deal with China in the future, and it's one that's coming up quite soon, the Beijing Winter Olympics. The European Parliament, I think in July, passed a resolution calling, in fact, setting down a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics, which means the athletes can go, but representatives of the European Union should not be going and sitting there in the stadiums as if nothing had happened. It looks like the Biden administration is, I think the spokesperson, Jan Psaki, said, are leaning in that direction. Let's start with you, Ramadov, in India. And again, this is an issue in its own right, but it's also something which could be seen as a proxy for how we deal with China on something it's not intrinsically a conflictual matter, sport, and yet it obviously has political ramifications. What's the Indian perspective in terms of the Olympic Games, and what's your perspective whether we should simply go there and leave politics out of it? Should we have a diplomatic boycott? Or should there, as some American senators, Senator Cotton has said, called it the genocide Olympics, that we shouldn't have any business going there again? And I was speaking to Dolzanika of the World Uyghur Congress the other day, and he's saying, you have to have learned the lessons from the past of the Munich Olympics, and there's a genocide going on in China. Should we just not be there at all? What is your approach to that particular question?
Between now and the Olympics, there is some time left. I hope this debate will evolve. But more than any other issue for India, as far as India is concerned, we are today having a standoff at the border with an active military standoff between the two countries. Whether we would be in a position to participate in the Olympics with the standoff continuing until then is another question that we would have to probably take into account at that time. But one thing I just wanted to add, that today AUKUS and the nuclearization of the Chinese army, we see those two have great relation. Extreme levels of clandestine nuclearization is happening. Ma'am talked about space. Today, we have artificial intelligence propelled underwater nuclear drones. That is to the extent that the Chinese nuclearization program is going on. I believe Pentagon has come out with a report also recently. So in that context, probably it is a reaction or whatever AUKUS is, we see it that way. sports and politics, it's an enduring debate. How far to go? Where to stop? Probably Olympics will give us one more opportunity, but for us the bigger issue is our border standoff.
So essentially, this is so. Given that you're actually engaged with standoff, military standoff, and people, I don't know how many, several dozen people died in the standoff last year. The question of the Olympic Games is a simply small fry, and it's not really.
No, I'm saying for us to participate in the Olympics, even this could become a major problem. I mean, with the two armies standing eyeball to eyeball for last more than a year. How can we send our athletes to Beijing to play football or some other game? That could also become a major political issue in India, but we will see how things develop.
So just to be clear, now to be clear, now I understand your point. As the months go by this year, it's not off the cards that India could completely boycott, in your opinion, participating in the Beijing Olympics next year.
No, as I said, any such decision probably we all have to together take. Not countries on standalone basis. In our case, I gave you a different scenario also, together with this challenge that you are posing.
Right. From the Croatian perspective, I mean, what do you think, first of all, Croatia itself and also your allies in Europe and in NATO, what do you think, how should they approach the Beijing Winter Olympics? I mean, in Xinjiang province, we have a genocide going on. There is massive oppression across China. Hong Kong, the one country, two systems. I was even saying this time last year, the one country, two systems arrangement is being eviscerated before our eyes. I mean, it's simply being stamped on now. It's essentially dead. Do we just carry on as if nothing had happened?
You see that European Union spoke with one voice when it comes to the human rights. And violation. First of all, we have to stand for ourselves, for our principles, and what mentioned at the very beginning, the rules of law, and actually rules-based order must be respected. And it is our starting point when it comes to a dialogue with China, and we reject actually that claims that China's social system governance is superior to the Western ones. Of course, any kind of resolution on the violation of the human rights, so we condemn it among the European Union. But actually we are, as a composition of democratic states, like here we are today, and it is also the matter of this discussion and Halifax International Security Forum, and I am really once again appreciate very much and thank you. That's so I'm here today. But I would like, just how we have to show our resilience and to be not dependent not only on China but also on others. This good example, for example, the 3 Seas initiatives, which Croatia was co-founder, our Madam President in 2015, fourth President Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, together with the Polish President in 2015, established this 3 Seas initiative. It's really this initiative has proven as a very good, effective mechanism for enhancing resilience of Central Europe through the establishment of the alternative energy corridor across the 3 Seas region. But not only energy diversification, but digitalization and to improve the traffic infrastructure. And it's composition of the 12 European countries. And just not to put on the same level of their economic growth like the West European countries are at the same position. And there is also funds, and many countries are invested there. United States strongly support this initiative, together also with Germany recently.
Sure. Mr. Stonewall, very quickly before I turn it over to the audience, do you have a view as to how we should handle the Beijing Winter Olympics?
Look, I do, but I'll just keep it to myself if it's all right, because I know it's bad enough with everyone telling the government what to do, and I often do that, I might say, as former Prime Minister. But I think on this one, it's a very delicate issue. A boycott of an Olympic Games could be very counterproductive unless it is very widespread. Mm-hmm. So it's got to be, it would really need, I think, to be effective, you would need to have, basically all like-minded countries taking the same decision. And I think it's something that's going to have to be considered very carefully. Sometimes you can, again, look, I made this point earlier about the submarines. Just because you label something hashtag standing up to China doesn't mean you're not shooting yourself in the foot.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, plenty of people want to ask a question. First of all, Liam Fox here, please. The former British Secretary of Defence and International Trade Secretary. There will be a microphone coming. Is there a microphone? Who's got the microphone?
There is.
Down here, please. Yeah. If you come down here, you'll be able to pass it round.
Yes. There are so many of them. Yes.
Thank you very much. 40% of the people on our planet get their drinking water from a river that arises on the Tibetan plateau. The Indus, the Brahmaputra, Ganges, Mekong, Yellow, Yangtze, all controlled by China. China is currently building 5 dams on the Brahmaputra. It's building the equivalent of 1 Three Gorges dam every year for the next 5 years, more than any country in history. Are we underestimating China's willingness to exploit its upstream position, and are we underestimating the potential trigger for conflict as a result?
Well, Mr. Madhav, that's a very specific question, and I think you're probably the best placed person to answer it.
No, yes, this is a major challenge for India. It is not only that it can create shortage of water, it also can create floods. All that they have to do is to release water from a dam. It has happened to us. We have suffered untimely and unreasonable type of water releases, which had led to major casualties in states, in the Himalayan states like Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. It's a serious threat. China refuses to have any water sharing agreement with us. We don't have any water sharing agreement with China. We are the downstream country. What is more pathetic is we have water sharing agreements with all the countries below us. So we are bound to give water to them, whereas we have no guarantee of getting water from China. China is doing lots of things. You mentioned about 5. We have a report of the Brahmaputra River having more than 100 sanctioned projects so far. So it's a big threat, but China refuses to go by any international conventions.
Thank you. Now, we've got loads of questions, understandably. Let me also remind you we have the same discussion, essentially, with Senators Chris Coons and Jim Rich after this. So if I can't get you now, I'll try and give it. Let's do man, woman, man, woman. I think it's Jane Harman. I can't tell because of the mask. Yes, this is hard when everyone's wearing masks and I can't be sure. Please, and then we'll come to the gentleman up there. Yep.
Jane Harman, former member of Congress, U.S. Congress, and President Emerita of the Wilson Center. I think most people agree that the way the AUKUS deal was handled hurt President Biden's standing in Europe, and he himself said it was clumsy. So my question is, starting at the negotiation of the deal, could France have been dealt in at the beginning, and or could the deal be structured now to include France, which is a major Indo-Pacific power?
Okay, we'll come back. Well, let's take at least 2 at once. And the gentleman up here has had his hand up for ages. And then I can see loads of others. I'm not ignoring you.
Thank you. My name is Dolkun Issa. I'm the Uyghur origin, president of the World Uyghur Congress. So today's panel title is Stand together on China, but unfortunately we have witnessed an entire world, most of the world, stand together with China. Yeah. So we are talking about the Olympics, just 2 months left, a little bit more than 2 months left for the Olympic. We have seen most of some country continue to stand with China. Today, is the Olympic, Beijing 22 Olympic is genocidal Olympic. And the 1936 is Nazi regime, with whole the world have a good experience on this, but never again happening again for the Uyghur today, because Chinese government today commit genocide against the Uyghurs. 3 million Uyghurs, Kazakh in the concentration camp today. We have seen what Chinese government cracked down on Hong Kong's democracy. What's going on in Tibet, everybody know, but still, and most of some country still silence. And last week, and President Biden called the diplomatic boycott. This is a good step, but most of some democratic countries still silence, and this Olympics looks taking place after 2 months later. So democratic voices split it, but authoritarian regime, and particularly China, mobilized entire world, and the authoritarian regime is getting more united, and democratic voice is getting split. So if this situation go on, continue, what kind of world are you imagining and after 20 or 15 years later? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with that one first, and we'll come back to questions again. I mean, it's hard not to sympathize and understand the position of the president of the World Uyghur Congress, isn't it? I mean, just imagine if it was, I mean, any ethnic group, but there's a genocide going on, your family is being killed, and Mr. Ayuko told me the other day, Mr. Issa, about members of his own family and the terrible oppression and people dying. And suddenly the world is sort of clapping its hands and watching sprinters and world records being broken. Meanwhile, your people are being murdered and put in concentration camps and shot and being observed and using facial recognition technology and oppressed. I mean, Senator Conway Murray, I mean, it's quite easy to understand where the anger and frustration comes from, isn't it? The question is, do we just say, well, they're angry and frustrated, or do we say, well, hold on a second, we really cannot continue to allow this to go on as if nothing had happened? And I'll come to you as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Europe has been applying sanctions since last year on China on the treatment of the Uyghur people. It may not be enough, and I understand that symbols are very important, and the hashtag would slightly disagree with the Prime Minister insofar as it is important for President Xi Jinping or President Putin and so on, you know, to show that they are getting things right and are imposing themselves on the world. But if the image that is coming back from us is the opposite of what they're actually selling in their country, then we start getting it right. Because we cannot today ignore the fact that China has been extremely busy on the social network, on having television channels, promoting Chinese propaganda. The UK has actually banned and stopped one of them, but French legislation doesn't allow us to do it in the name of freedom of speech. So they have actually penetrated the opinion, the public opinion, in a very positive way to make us collectively accept what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to kind of fight them at that level now, because the soft power has been working very well. They haven't just invested, financially. I think they have penetrated as well our minds somehow. So anything that is symbolic for me, that is actually showing that no, we resist, that we do not agree, I think is important. Yeah. And what's happening with the water, I think can happen in a lot of other sectors. Let's not forget that China has put its hands on a lot of resources, natural resources, rare earth, and so on. And if tomorrow they stop the tap by saying we're the only ones who actually possess these materials to build whatever, and we do not share them, what will we do? Will the rest of the world stop? we're so dependent on China now that we, I think, collectively have a problem.
Perfect timing coming back here, because now let's turn to Jane Harman's question, which is, in a nutshell, essentially, is AUKUS actually salvageable to bring the French back in some way? Is that essentially what you were saying? I think that was more or less what you were saying, yes.
Well, I think in terms of the submarines, I think the best course of action, you can't live your life backwards, obviously, but the best course of action would have been for everyone to be honest and upfront, right? That's always the best way to do business, particularly with friends and allies. I think the better course for us, Australia, to progress to naval nuclear propulsion was along the lines of what I had discussed with President Macron some years ago, which was over time to build some diesel electric boats. Remember, we were the ones that stipulated diesel electric because the design of the French boat is in fact France's latest nuclear submarine, the short fin Barracuda, now called the Suffren class. I think that would have been a better course of action. It would have got new capabilities in the water sooner, and it would have been, better from a proliferation point of view. At least if we'd had that discussion, even if we'd taken a different course, France couldn't have felt deceived. But yes, I do think bringing France closer in to our partnership in the Indo-Pacific is enormously important. I mean, the point that the Senator made earlier is absolutely right. France doesn't have to go to the Pacific, it is there. There are 2 million citizens of the French Republic in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. And, Britain left east of Suez, what Liam would remember, 64 or 5 or something. It's a long time ago. I really firmly believe there is safety in numbers, and I really firmly believe that we need to build stronger alliances. That's why we worked more closely with the Philippines, with Indonesia. You've got to build those linkages. If you want to stand up for your values, you've got to make sure you're meshed in with those who share them.
Okay, we did start quite a few minutes late, but we'll still keep this tight. So I just want to I'm very sorry to other people, but as I say, I'll try and bring you in when we're discussing with the senators. Just in 20 seconds, of course, I think it would have been absurd to have had this conversation and to have ignored AUKUS, because this has been a major spat. And when we're talking about standing together on China and building alliances, the idea that we simply pretend that there aren't bumps on the road, I think is highly counterproductive. Looking ahead, just each of you in 20 seconds, do you have a sense that there really has been a shift forward and that there is a greater will now than ever before to really build these alliances to stand together on China? And just to remind everybody, please do make use of the social media campaign and the booths we have available if you want to add your voice to this. Please, Senator Lemouret, and we'll go just back across the panel.
Well, I could just use 2 seconds and say yes. Okay. We are on the same side of the fence. And whatever disagreements and bad manners and whatever, I think, we have no choice. And I think there is an awareness now that we do have a problem and that we have to come together. And this is a great forum to think, how we move forward. But I think there is no choice. China has been successful in dividing us as well in Europe, by creating the 16+1 group. They have been very successful, but we know it. And now we need to kind of counter what they have done and be as successful as they have been.
Yeah, well, look, 5 or 6 years ago, this would have been a question which would not necessarily have elicited such a strong answer. So progress happens, if only slowly. Ramadov, similarly, in a very short time.
Yes, containing China or standing together on China requires that we manage Indo-Pacific affairs more diligently and more cautiously. One of the many things are there. One important aspect that we feel is there is a clandestine effort to effect regime changes in many of these countries. Today, for Australia, South Pacific Island nations could become a challenge. For India, the neighborhood Indian Ocean countries, where there have been regimes in last 5 years that were broadly friendly with the present world order, were there. But all those countries are facing regime changes. And it is there that for us a big challenge will come up. Reunion Island for France could be there, but if Seychelles is not cooperative, Mauritius is not cooperative, Maldives is not cooperative, it will be a difficult time to manage that region. So regime changes is a challenge for us in our own neighborhood and also in the extended neighborhood of Indian Ocean. We are quite concerned about it. We all have to come together to ensure proper democratically committed regimes remain in power in those countries, not the vassals or satellites of China.
Thank you. Mr. Grlić-Radman, and again, just literally in 20 seconds if you can, do you have a sense that Croatia itself, but Europe, the European Union, really is coming together, takes this seriously, and in terms of standing together on China, we're moving in the right direction?
Yes, although we are a small country, but so we don't feel that so we are small. Actually, in the world, there are two types, profiles of the countries. Small countries and the other, they are not aware that so they are small. So that means that we depend on each other and we rely on each other. I think so, first of all, to protect the values, rule of laws, just we stick to, and we should to do united to protect it. And in doing that, we should unanimous to make a pressure on China to respect human rights, to respect rule of law, actually all the values we adopted. And of course, everything comes with a price, and we should be able also to offer a better alternative if there's not quite right now.
Thank you very much. Final word from Australia, Mr. Turnbull.
The answer is yes, and it's important that as we defend our own sovereignty and resist might is right, that we also reach out and defend and support those who are resisting it. As you know, we've been put in the freezer by China in recent years, and we obviously appreciate the solidarity we felt from others. But the one lesson is you cannot take a backward step. I mean, just think of the shopping scene in Pretty Woman, in the shopping scene. When more sucking up only begets a call for even yet more sucking up. So, you just have to, imperial powers regard deference as their due. So once you start caving in, you only get more demands for more caving in. So sometimes you have to take the flak, but you've got to stand up, and it's really important that we get solidarity, and I want to thank the Halifax Forum for being a vehicle and a means for that solidarity.
Well, thank you. You can make it 10 seconds, but no more.
Oh, even less. I just want to say that I'm wearing this mask, which is made in Taiwan. And we do that in the French Parliament because it is filmed, and it is one way, I know, very small, but symbolic way of showing solidarity.
Well, that's a terrific way to end it. Thank you very much. Thank you to you all. Ladies and gentlemen, just to remind you, if you'd stay in your seats, because we'll have a very quick set change, and then we'll go straight into Senators Risch and Senator Coons.